When you pay a mortgage, what are you really paying for? Homeownership is the better option in the long run. They are paying an enormous amount of money in their mortgage. Hello, it's Kyle and welcome back to another personal finance video. Today's video is going to be all about homeownership and mortgages and all that kind of stuff. So the three topics we're going to be talking about. First, we're going to be talking about the anatomy of a mortgage. What is a mortgage made up of? The next thing we're going to be talking about is being a renter versus being a homeowner. And then the final thing we're going to talk about is making that transition from a renter to a homeowner. So let's go ahead and start off with the anatomy of a mortgage. So I've had a lot of people mention in comments, especially on my wife's What We Spent in a Week videos, that they ask questions like, how do you pay property taxes? Or what about homeowners insurance and those kinds of things? Well, when you have a mortgage, a lot of that stuff is already covered in the mortgage payment. So you're not making separate payments for property taxes and for homeowners insurance and all kinds of things like that. So when you go from being a renter to a homeowner, you'll find that a lot of that stuff is covered. And so let's go ahead and talk about the pieces then of what that looks like. When you pay a mortgage, what are you really paying for? So the first thing and the most obvious thing that you're paying for is you're paying for the principal and you're paying for the interest on the loan that you took out to get the house that you are currently living in. So that part is pretty straightforward. Everybody knows that. We're paying down the debt and we're also paying the interest to the bank because the bank gave us the money. So we're giving them back a little extra for basically loaning out money to us. But beyond that, there are other things that your money is going toward. There is an account, it's called an escrow account. An escrow account is an account where your bank takes money from you and then they have become the responsible partner in paying your homeowner's insurance and your property taxes. The reason why the bank does this is because they don't want to run the risk of you not paying your property taxes or not paying your homeowner's insurance. And it's pretty obvious, if you don't pay your property taxes, then the government confiscates your house. If they do that, then the bank can't reclaim the house for themselves and get their money back for the loan that you took out. And then if you don't pay for insurance, if your house burns down, then the bank has nothing to repo from you because the house is ashes now. And it's not worth anything to anybody. So at least if you had insurance, they could take the money from the insurance claim and recoup their losses that way. So this is why when you take out a loan with a bank, they require you to have an escrow account so that they can make sure that you are paying your property taxes and paying your homeowner's insurance on time. Now, that does mean you still get to pick the group that you want to do homeowner's insurance through. So you still have that autonomy. You get to make that choice, but you're not the one that's handling the payment of it. It's actually being paid by the bank. And so that is probably the next most common thing. So besides the principal and the interest, the next most common thing is the escrow account, which is your property taxes and your home insurance. Besides those things, there are other things that could be lumped into your mortgage depending on where your home is at and the different rules in your state or whatever. So some other things that can happen beyond those core four. So the four things I've mentioned so far, those are the core things that you will be paying in your mortgage. So here's some other things that could potentially be pulled from your mortgage. HOA fees. So if you're in a home association, they may pull from your mortgage that money rather than you paying it directly. Again, kind of going back to the bank, The bank wants to make sure that the property is up to date on all those things so that they can make sure that they get their money in the event that you don't pay. So they're protecting the asset too in the event that they have to repo it. So there's possibility that the HOA fees will get lumped into the mortgage. Also, PMI is another thing that gets lumped into the mortgage. So if you don't put down 20% on the loan right from the start, you have to pay PMI, which is another insurance that essentially protects the bank in the event that you don't repay them what you owe them. Now, a lot of first-time home buyers can avoid PMI so that they can get into their first house. That's actually what my wife and I did. We didn't really put any money down when we bought our house. So we don't have PMI in our mortgage. We should have PMI because we put nothing down. But because we're first-time home buyers, we got that special deal. Now, in the future, if we were to buy another home and switch out of this home, we would need to make sure that we have 20% down, or else we will have to pay PMI. So some people have to pay PMI in addition to the other things that we just mentioned that a mortgage may have. Now, with all that said, once you pay off your mortgage, right, you become debt-free with that part and you don't have a mortgage anymore, you are still on the hook for property taxes and homeowner's insurance. The difference is now that you have to save the money every month. There's not somebody coming every month saying, okay, you should put down a little bit of money because in a few months from now, you're going to get a property tax bill, or in a year, you're going to get your insurance bill, because most insurance companies bill yearly for home insurance. Nobody's telling you that. You are the one responsible to make sure that you're saving up enough money to make those payments. So that's something that you also have to think about. When you finally own the home, the only things from the mortgage that disappear is the principal and the interest. The other things that were inside the mortgage, you are still responsible for paying. So we are paying $781 right now on our mortgage, and about $300 of that is going to property taxes and homeowners insurance. And the rest of it is going to the principal and interest. So when this house gets paid off, that $400-ish will disappear, but the rest of it, we still are responsible for saving up for and paying those things when the bills come due. So that's something to think about when you are buying a home. Your mortgage is more, you're paying for more things than you realize you are paying for. Okay, let's go ahead and move on to the second segment today, which is renting versus owning. What are the pros and cons of these two things? So my wife and I, when we first got married, we actually rented. We rented for almost a year before we moved into the house that we're in now. And I know when we first got married, for me personally, renting was always something of like, oh, we're throwing money away, and you get kind of anxious and you want to try to get a home quickly so that you can start building wealth and that sort of thing. Also, during that time was just a little bit after COVID. We're still in that whole home buying frenzy, I guess you could say, where a lot of people had their interest rates at 3%, 2.75%, and all that kind of stuff. And so there was a lot of pressure to be like, oh, we need to kind of buy now because we have all these really good interest rates and we might miss out on that opportunity if we wait too long. So there was also that FOMO going on too. When we did buy the house and started becoming homeowners, you know, there's just some things that you notice as a homeowner that are things that are just different than being a renter. And in these two segments, we're going to be talking about that. But let's start with what are the pros and cons of being a renter versus a homeowner. So as a homeowner, you do get to build wealth, whereas as a renter, you're not. As a renter, you are basically helping somebody else build wealth. You are helping your landlord build wealth because more than likely your rent payment is helping pay the mortgage for the landlord so that the landlord can eventually pay off that house, and all of the value of the house is now theirs, right? It's been unlocked. So you are not really, every payment you're making is not really building wealth for you. It's building wealth for the landlord who owns the house that you are living in. So building wealth is extremely important. And if you do a Google search, or if you look and read at different news articles out there, they'll talk about one of the key points or key differences between people who are building wealth and becoming closer to net worth millionaires versus those who are not. Homeownership is a key difference there. Those who own homes are typically going that direction, whereas those who are not as making as much progress. So beyond that, homeowners also have tax benefits that renters don't get, such as when you're paying your property taxes, you can write that off on some of the other taxes you're making and potentially have less of a tax burden. This is why a lot of people were really up with the big beautiful bill, the whole SALT thing, that with different states, they have really high state taxes and property taxes and those sorts of things. And they're wanting those exemptions because if they don't have those, then they're getting kind of double taxed. They're getting the property tax and all those taxes, plus the federal taxes too. So there was a lot of big push and debate about that when they were creating those budgets and the bill, the big beautiful bill, and putting that together. So as a homeowner, you get those kinds of benefits that renters do not. Yes, renters have benefits too. If you talk to your accountant and your tax filers and stuff like that, they'll let you know that renters do have benefits as well. But there are, in many cases, really good benefits that homeowners have that unfortunately renters cannot get because they're not the ones that are responsible for the property taxes and things like that the landlord is paying. Homeownership also does provide a level of stability. I know a lot of renters will complain about how when their lease is up after a year, then the rent goes up, and it's always consistent every single year, up, up, and up. And there is some level of stability as a homeowner. We'll talk a little bit later when we get to the next segment, but it's not necessarily always stagnant. But yeah, well, without sharing too much, because I don't want to double dip here on that, but there is some level of stability that a homeowner has in their payments every single year compared to those who are renting. And that is a big benefit as a landlord or as somebody who owns a house, because you can see all around you, inflation and all this stuff going on, and you're kind of insulated a little bit from that as a homeowner. Now, it's not just all pros for homeownership and no pros for renting. There are some pros to renting as well. So some of the good things that renters have is flexibility. When you buy a house, you're kind of stuck unless you can manage to get somebody else to buy it from you, right? Successfully sell the house. As a renter, the most that you're really stuck in a place is 1 to 2 years, depending on the lease. And then you're out of there. You can go somewhere else. And in some places, they have shorter leases than that. So you have a lot of flexibility as a renter. And this is especially useful for those who have careers where they're constantly moving. So if you're in the military, which military families do have a lot of times military housing that they can use as well. But if you're in a type of job where you are moving a lot, renting is a great option because you're not constantly having to go through the cycles of buying a house and then trying to sell the house and then buy another house. Instead, the renting process is a lot easier and smoother when you have to make big moves like that. So there's a lot of flexibility there where you don't have that as a homeowner. The other thing that renting does have is that it does alleviate you of the burden of having to care for the house. You are not responsible for the house. You can call the landlord and say, hey, there's this going on, the roof is leaking, the appliance fell apart, whatever it is, and you can have the landlord take care of those things instead of you. So there is a little bit of freedom and a little bit less responsibility as a renter compared to a homeowner, in the sense that you don't need to be worried about what's going on with the house. You don't need to be thinking 5-10 years from now what the house is going to look like or what the house is going to need fixed up or any of that kind of stuff. You're not responsible for any of it. So that pretty much wraps up the two big things that renters have as advantages compared to homeowners. Now, overall, big picture here, taking a big step back, homeownership is the better option in the long run. If we're talking 30 years, 40 years, right, and we're looking at the advantages and the growth of wealth and all that kind of stuff, homeowners have the leg up. They have the advantage. So if you're young, you don't necessarily have to rush into homeownership. You can still rent. I just wouldn't consider it to be a long-term solution. You should eventually try to find a house that you can afford and then live there and start really supercharging and building up your wealth accumulation through home ownership. Because when you buy a house, if you care for it and you do the things that are necessary, the value of that house is only going to really go up. It's not likely to go down. I mean, we have had some cases where home prices have dropped, right? The Great Recession being a big example of that. But regardless, that's a blip in the history or the patterns that we see. It, for the most part, continues to rise. So it is an asset that continues to go up. There are not very many assets that are like that, right? Cars go down. A lot of the appliances and things that you buy for your house go down in price. Things get used, and when they get used, they decrease in value. But houses are one of the few exceptions to that rule. So in the long run, like I said, big picture, you should start to find a house to own eventually. Just don't feel the need to rush into it. It's okay to rent, and especially if your career requires you to be a renter, then it's okay to do that. You might just need to pour more of your money into stocks and things like that so that you are continuing to build wealth, because you're going to miss out on the home ownership side of wealth creation. So if you have any thoughts about that, renting versus home ownership, is there anything that I missed as far as pros and cons for both of those things? Let me know in the comments down below. Okay, let's move to the third topic. The third topic is going from renting to home ownership. Like I said, my wife and I, we started out as renters, and then we moved into home ownership. There are some key misconceptions on the internet by people, usually people who have never owned a home and have only been renters. They will make certain assumptions about home ownership that's just simply not true. For example, one of the key ones being, well, I pay $1,000 in rent every month. I should be able to pay $1,000 on a mortgage every single month. Since I'm already paying the rent, why can't I pay a mortgage at that amount? Why won't a bank approve me for that amount? And that can be very frustrating because it can seem like those are the same things, right? A rental payment versus a mortgage, they basically are the same thing, correct? Well, not necessarily. Let's look at what a renter is doing when a renter pays rent. So first off, we can assume that they are paying the mortgage, right? Especially if you're in a one-house rental property, right? You're not in an apartment or a duplex where you're sharing that mortgage burden with the other renters. If you're in a one-house rental property, right, one unit, I guess I should say, rental property, you can safely assume that your rent is covering the mortgage. What else does a rent payment cover? Well, it also covers the taxes, right? Technically, it is a business that your landlord is running. So they're paying higher property taxes compared to somebody who is using a house as a home rather than a business. So you're covering those higher taxes, you're covering the mortgage part, the principal and the interest and whatever else is included, the insurance. And of course, they're not doing it for free. It's not a nonprofit. They're also looking to make money from it. So you're also paying the profit too. Now, when you take those three things into account, you may assume, well, okay, Kyle, I think you just proved that I should definitely be able to afford a $1,000 mortgage because I'm paying the mortgage plus all of the other stuff in my rent payment. So shouldn't that matter? Well, there are some things you have to consider that are also missing in the equation. So there's more to home ownership than just paying the rent, though there are other things to be aware of, such as the utilities. So a lot of times rent payments do cover some of the utilities. So the rental that we were in, it covered trash. So we had to pay the water bill, the internet bill, the gas, and electricity. We had to pay that stuff, but we were not responsible for the trash payment. That was part of the rental agreement. So you have to think, does your rental agreement include some of those utilities? Because if they do, you are going to be on the hook for those things when you become a homeowner, because there's no one covering that anymore. You're going to have the mortgage plus all of those utilities. So you might want to rethink that math. Let's use the $1,000 example again. So if you were to switch to a $1,000 mortgage, but your trash was being covered or whatever other utilities, now it's a $1,000 mortgage plus all those other utilities that you were not paying before on top of it. Now you're paying more than what you were paying when you were renting in a different property, right? So you got to watch out for that kind of stuff. What is it that you get as a benefit as a renter that you're not paying for that you will have to pay for when you become a homeowner? Some other things that you need to be aware of is that mortgages don't stay the same. So you think about the $1,000, right? And yes, I understand rental payments don't stay the same either, right? If we're talking a $1,000 example, it might be $1,100 the next year for rent and et cetera, et cetera. But the same thing is happening with mortgages too. A lot of people fail to realize that mortgages go up yearly as well, and it's based on the escrow. So the principal and the interest, those will stay the same, those won't go up, but your property taxes and your homeowner's insurance can go up from year to year. So as taxes go up or as the value of your house goes up, then property taxes go up. And then homeowner's insurance, unless you threaten to switch every so often, they will slowly boil the frog, right? They're going to slowly increase the price of your homeowner's insurance until you threaten to switch, and then they might come down on their price. So all of that goes into your mortgage as well. So like for us, when we bought this house, we were paying $718. Now we're paying $781, and very soon, as we're recording this video, it's going to be jumping up to $840 a month. So it's going to be a big bump for this next year. So as you can see, it might not be as much as maybe a renter is having to pay from year to year, but it is an increase that you have to consider as a new homeowner. Don't assume that, oh, I signed up for a $1,000 mortgage, that's all it's ever going to be for 30 years. No, it's going to slowly creep up over time due to property taxes and insurance. The other thing that we have to think about is maintenance and emergencies. You don't have a landlord to call to repair appliances or fix a hole in the roof or mow the lawn or whatever else that you are required to do as a homeowner that you did not have to do as a renter. And so this can be very tricky, because if you are a renter and you're thinking, oh, I can afford a $1,000 mortgage, but your budget's kind of tight with the $1,000 rent, your margin, right, your emergency fund, the amount of money left over in your budget may not be enough to cover any unforeseen emergencies that do pop up. So if your stove goes out, will you have the money to cover that? The answer might be no if your budget is completely maxed out. You know, there's a thing, it's called being house poor. It's a term that people use to talk about people who basically maxed out their budget. They are paying an enormous amount of money in their mortgage every single month, to the point where they have no margin in their budget to save for any sort of emergencies or repairs to the house or improvements on the house. They can't afford any of it. All they can do is sit in their house and continue to make those payments and just cross their fingers and hope that nothing expensive breaks for 15 to 30 years. You don't want to put yourself in that position. You want to make sure that you have enough margin so that you can cover any sort of unforeseen expenses that come along. This is why sometimes when I drive around, I'll see houses over the years that just slowly wear down and get ugly and beat up and everything. And then people might foreclose on it or move away from it. It becomes a dump. What usually happens in those cases? Well, a lot of times it's somebody who bought a house that they really couldn't afford, but they thought, maybe they were a renter before, and they thought, well, I made the rent payment so I can make the mortgage payment. And they couldn't afford any of the other repairs that were needed, and then just slowly over time, the house got worse and worse and worse. So my recommendation to you, if you are a renter looking to become a homeowner, right, you're a first-time home buyer, I would not try to max out your the amount you can afford in your mortgage. Whatever your rent payment is, I would try to find a mortgage that's cheaper than that. Because again, it's going to go up slowly, and you need to have some room in your budget for any unforeseen costs that pop up. You know, there's these things, they call them homeowner specials, where you walk the house, things look great, then you peel up the carpet or you replace the bathtub or whatever, and then you discover some damage that you didn't see when you bought the house, and now you got a much bigger repair than you realized after, you already signed the agreement and bought the house. That is why you need to create margin in your budget so that you can have the money necessary to cover those things. All right, we're going to stop the episode there. If you have any thoughts about becoming a first-time home buyer, looking around for homes and things to think about, maybe you are somebody who has owned a house for a long time and you got some wisdom to share about buying a home and being a homeowner, go ahead and let us know down in the comments below so that we can learn some things from you as well. Thank you for watching all the way to the end of the video, and as always, we'll see you guys on the next one.